Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily, narrowing down the jury in the death of the Ahmaud Arbery trial.
Do you agree that people of color are not treated fairly in the criminal justice system? Raise your hand if you agree with that.
And bond denied for South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh, the latest twist in the Murdaugh murder mystery. Plus, former President Donald Trump advisor Steve Bannon could be held in criminal contempt. This as the former president sues to keep personal files under wraps. And later, convicted killer Derek Chauvin acquires a new attorney. How the ex-cop plans to move forward by appealing his conviction. Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. All eyes are on Georgia now as jury selection moves forward in the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial.
Bottom line here is there is a case here in the Superior Court that needs to be resolved, and we can't do that without jurors, which means we can't do that without you. So thank you.
That's the message Judge Timothy Walmsley gave to potential jurors Tuesday morning as the second day of jury selection kicked off. Before the trial can begin, 12 jurors must be seated along with 4 alternates. Jury duty notices were mailed to 1,000 people in the Brunswick, Georgia area, with 600 people called to appear starting on Monday. Due to social distancing, potential jurors are waiting in a nearby gymnasium and questioned in the courtroom in groups of 20. All this as 3 Georgia men face charges of malice murder, felony murder, and other charges in the death of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery. In February 2020, Arbery was shot and killed while jogging near his Brunswick, Georgia home. He was unarmed at the time of his death. Father and son duo Gregory and Travis McMichael tailed Arbery in a pickup truck before Travis McMichael shot and killed him. The pair claimed self-defense and planned to use a Georgia citizen's arrest law that has since been repealed and replaced. The McMichaels' neighbor William Bryan followed along in his truck, capturing the entire incident on his cell phone. The shooting created national outrage after that cell phone video went viral in May of last year. After that, Gregory and Travis McMichael were arrested, followed by Bryan's arrest 2 weeks later. All 3 men have pled not guilty to the charges. On Tuesday, Law and Crimes Network's Linda Kenny Bodden spoke with Jason Sheffield, attorney to Travis McMichael, about finding a fair and balanced jury.
Jury selection is the most important part of any trial, my belief is. What are you looking for in terms of a juror in this case, a fair juror?
We're looking for people who understand truly the concept of their duty and their responsibility as a juror. We're looking for people who may recognize that they've heard a lot about this case, that it's come from the media, that it's come from conversation in the community, but that they haven't actually heard the true facts of the case. And we're looking for them to recognize the difference between what they may hear in the media versus what they hear in the courtroom, and to promise us that pursuant to that duty and that responsibility that we all have towards our truth-seeking process, to the presumption of innocence, to the burden of proof on the prosecution, that they will come into this case with an open mind and not have any prejudgments about the guilt of the accused.
Joining us today is criminal defense attorney Matthew Mangino and Terry Austin. Matthew, what do you anticipate are some of the difficulties in picking a jury in a small county with such a large case?
Well, Brian, I think number one is logistics. I mean, you're talking about an unusual pool of jurors, 600 jurors, 1,000 that received juror requests. So you're going to have a logistical problem with regard to where do these people stay, certainly within the confines of COVID-19. How are we going to separate these people? So logistically, there's going to be a problem. And then you're going to go through this process of asking questions of these jurors individually with regard to what they know about this case and whether they have made any predetermined decision based on what they've learned. So it's going to be an arduous process to get through this pool.
Absolutely. They anticipate 1 to maybe even 2 weeks to go through that process. Terry, how has jury selection been going so far? And does that give you any insight as to how long it could last? Do you think it's going to last that 2 weeks?
I do think it's going to last that 2 weeks. That's what the judge actually estimated. And as you said, there are so many jurors to go through. They're taking that 600, putting them in a room so that there's only 20 and they have that distance apart. But first, the court is going to ask the statutory questions, and then we will hear from the state, and the state will read its approved questions, and then you're going to hear from the defense, who's going to do the same thing. And by the time you get through all of those jurors who are rejected either because of cause or rejected because they have a preemptory challenge, that's going to take some time. So far, what we have heard, though, is some of these jurors do feel negative against the case. So the real point is whether or not they're going to be able to be fair.
Yeah, got to try to find someone neutral in this because, like we said, so much media, so much attention on this case. It's not about finding someone who doesn't know about the case, but someone who could be fair and impartial, as you've always said in the past, Terry. Thank you both. Now on to the federal trial of Elizabeth Holmes, where a family friend turned Theranos employee takes the stand. Daniel Edlin was once college buddies at Duke University with Elizabeth Holmes' brother, Christian. He was later hired by his friend's sister as a senior product manager for Theranos back in 2011. He was given crucial assignments such as the company's Walgreens partnership and organizing tours of headquarters for investors, board members, and business partners. Edlin was called by prosecutors to testify about his role in the company, to times when he was asked by Holmes to make adjustments for tours of HQ that required hiding certain areas of its research and development lab from important visitors. He also said that partitions were sometimes in place to hide areas where Theranos devices were located. Edlin also said that he never gave a tour of the clinical lab itself, which is where the patient samples were allegedly tested. Holmes, the former CEO of now-defunct company Theranos, faces 12 counts of fraud for her time with the company. Holmes claimed Theranos would revolutionize blood testing, but later tests found many problems with Theranos devices. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, former President Trump files a lawsuit to keep White House records a secret. But first, Alex Murdaugh appears in a South Carolina courtroom, and Law and Crime Daily's Angela Levy brings us the latest developments in the Murdaugh murder mystery. It was the video that shocked the nation. An unarmed black jogger, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, gunned down in broad daylight. The three men charged will now stand trial. For live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial, subscribe to Law and Crime on YouTubeTV today. Welcome back. Disgraced South Carolina lawyer Alex Murdaugh will remain behind bars for now. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with what happened at Murdaugh's bail hearing and what his lawyer has to say about it. Anjanette?
Brian, the judge ordered Alex Murdaugh held without bail at this time, and he said Murdaugh must undergo a psychiatric evaluation before he will consider setting bail for him again. The judge cited Murdaugh's opioid addiction and the allegation that he attempted to arrange his own death. Now, Alex Murdaugh appeared in a Richland County courtroom this morning on charges related to claims he kept $4.3 million from an insurance settlement for the death of his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield. She died in 2018 in what was described as a, quote, trip and fall accident at Murdaugh's home, but an autopsy was never conducted. Today, the chief of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division said the cause of Satterfield's death is now being investigated. Murdaugh already faces charges over an allegation he tried to arrange his own suicide so his son could collect $10 million in life insurance money. And he's also a person of interest in the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul back in June. He was arrested last week after leaving a rehab center in Florida. The lawyers for both sides spoke after the hearing.
We knew it was going to be an uphill battle. Obviously, the public interest and the enormity of the accusations. But we're glad that the judge is concerned about his mental condition. And we think we can get him a relatively clean bill of health by the end of this week, early next week, from a psychiatrist based on the 6 weeks of examinations he's had by mental health experts, both at the detox center and the rehab facility.
You know, a lot of times we say when a lawyer steals with a pen, it's just as bad as somebody who steals with a gun. We talked about that in the court there today, and a lot of times it doesn't resonate, but I actually believe that it did resonate today.
Now, the chief of SLED said in court that they are investigating a number of allegations, including the death of Gloria Satterfield and also the death of Stephen Smith in a hit and run. There was actually no mention from SLED in court when they were asked by the judge about other open investigations. So there was no mention of the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, in which Alex Murdaugh is a person of interest. And when asked, Murdaugh's lawyers said after court that his client had nothing to do with the death of his wife and son. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Let's bring back defense attorney Matt Mangino and Terry Austin to discuss the latest in the Murdaugh murder mystery. Terry, what does it mean to be denied bond, and could that change for Murdaugh?
Well, what it means is he will not be released from jail. He'll be held in Columbia, South Carolina. And as Anjanette said, this is for the theft of those settlement funds. It's interesting to note that the prosecution only asked for bail in the amount of $200,000, and of course the defense was asking that he be released on his own recognizance. The judge actually did say that he was concerned about his mental health. It wasn't a notion of flight, it was a notion of he might be harmful to himself. And so the judge ordered this evaluation. Now, it could change the situation if in fact this evaluation comes back and finds that Murdaugh is in good health and mentally sound. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that evaluation.
Now, Matthew, is that somewhat shocking that a former attorney would be denied bond, not high bond, but completely denied bond, partly because of his mental health evaluation?
Well, it is shocking, whether it's a lawyer or not. Everyone's entitled to bond outside of a capital case. So the fact that there's no bond at all in this case, this individual can't bond himself out, is shocking. You might see in situations where there's a very high bond, which will ensure that someone's kept in jail, pending trial. But in this situation, you have a judge who's talking about somebody's mental health, talking about the fact that he's a potential harm to himself. Is the best place for this person in jail if he's a potential harm to himself? I mean, suicide is certainly an issue within the confines of local jails. So I'm surprised by the fact that bond was denied and he was, sent to jail pending trial or pending a mental health evaluation.
Yeah, as a public defender for almost 7 years now, I've never seen someone's mental health get better in jail. So it's an odd thing for me to see. And Jeanette, what about the $4.3 million from Gloria Satterfield's death? Where's that money?
Well, it's really interesting. After court, Eric Bland, one of the attorneys for the Satterfield family, said that they've actually gotten some of that money back. And he said, we will get all of it back. So I don't know how he thinks they're going to get it unless it's an account somewhere, or they think that Alex Murdaugh might have some of this money just kind of laying around. I don't know. But they are confident, they said, that they will get that money for their clients. All
right, let's hope that happens very soon. Thank you all. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, convicted killer Derek Chauvin to appeal his case with a new attorney. Plus, will former Trump advisor Steve Bannon be held in contempt of court? When the Select Committee will make their vote next on Law&Crime Daily. Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. The so-called January 6th committee is set to vote Tuesday night whether to hold former White House advisor Steve Bannon in contempt of court. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump files a lawsuit to prevent the committee from accessing his records. All this is in relation to the Capitol riots that happened on January 6th. As Law&Crime Daily reported, the House Select Committee in charge of investigating the January 6th attacks requested Bannon provide details about conversations he had with former President Donald Trump. They say those conversations happened leading up to the riots. Bannon refused to provide the information and didn't show up after being subpoenaed. On Monday, former President Trump filed a lawsuit to stop the January 6th committee from obtaining his records. He says the requests are unconstitutionally overbroad and violate the separation of powers principles. This comes after President Joe Biden refused to back Trump's claim that the records are protected by executive privilege. In response to former President Trump's lawsuit, the committee issued a statement saying in part, quote, the former president's clear objection is to stop the select committee from getting to the facts about January 6th, and his lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to delay and obstruct our probe. Let's bring back defense attorney Matthew Mangino and co-host Terry Austin. Terry, do you see any strengths or merit in the former president's lawsuit to stop the subpoena from Bannon?
I absolutely think this is a long shot as far as this lawsuit is concerned. The committee is requesting these documents, and it is an executive privilege whether or not they should be produced. Biden has said he's not going to assert this executive privilege, and he cited the fact that there is a public interest to see these documents. And frankly, I think that these White House records should be released and that the privilege does not apply to Trump, who is a former president and not a current executive. So, you know, Trump is claiming clearly that there is no legislative purpose for this, that it's a fishing expedition. But I think that this privilege is something that is reserved for the executive, and his argument will not prevail at the end of the day.
Now, Matthew, does Congress have the power to vote on contempt charges before the lawsuit is decided? And if they do, how do you think they'll rule?
Well, I think that the Congress does have the ability to vote on contempt before this lawsuit is resolved. The lawsuit is not in any way aimed at declaring some sort of injunctive relief, and I think it would be a separation of powers issue if it was. You can't thumb your nose at Congress. If Congress issues a subpoena, if they want records, if they want you to appear, you just can't ignore them. And I think that Congress is going to take action in this case because you simply cannot let someone just turn their back and refuse to comply with the authority of the United States Congress. It's a dangerous precedent to do nothing here, and I think Congress will act.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's the line there, a dangerous precedent for them not to act. I think they will do so just so other people don't get a similar idea. Great point, Matthew. Turning now to Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross, whose weekly episode of Brian Ross Investigates focuses on a little-known military scandal. Brian?
Thanks, Brian. Coming up this week on Brian Ross Investigates, a huge scandal that most people have never heard of involving the U.S. Navy, top admirals, and a man by the name of Fat Leonard, who used hookers and cash and his own charm to win millions of dollars in Navy contracts across the Pacific.
Fat Leonard has pleaded guilty to corrupting the U.S. Navy and creating a mafia-like organization inside the Navy. Partly what's going on here is he believes there's been a cover-up in the U.S. Navy, and a lot of the information that he gave to investigators about admirals that dealt with him wasn't acted upon in his view, and that's one of the reasons that he talked.
That's coming up this week on Brian Ross Investigates on the Law&Crime Trial Network. Brian?
Thanks, Brian. You can catch Brian Ross Investigates on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5:30 and 10:30 Eastern Time. When we come back, Derek Chauvin finds new representation in court. How private attorneys stepped up to represent the convicted murderer as he looks to appeal his guilty verdict in the George Floyd's murder. Welcome back. Ex-Minnesota police officer and convicted killer Derek Chauvin acquires a new attorney after the Minnesota Supreme Court denied his request for a public defender. Back in 2020, Derek Chauvin was convicted of second and third degree murder and second degree manslaughter for the murder of George Floyd. He was sentenced to more than 22 years in prison. Earlier this month, the Minnesota Supreme Court denied a public defender for the ex-cop who plans to appeal his case. Chauvin said that he had no money and that his debts greatly outweighed his assets. This left him to represent himself since he wouldn't be able to cover attorney's fees. His attorney in the previous case, Eric Nelson, was paid through the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association Legal Defense Fund. In a recent filing, attorney William Moran stated that the law firm of Moran, Cardell, and Erickson, PA, will appear for on Chauvin's behalf. The Minneapolis Police Federation says they are not paying for Moran's representation. Right now, it's unclear how Chauvin's newly hired team will be compensated. Matthew, what does it mean that Chauvin was denied a public defender after his debts and assets were reviewed, especially since now he's hired an attorney?
Well, we all know, Brian, that a defendant is entitled to an attorney, but that doesn't mean he's entitled to a free attorney. If you have the means to pay for an attorney, then you have to pay for your own counsel. Only those who are indigent are entitled to free representation. So in this case, as in every case, public defender's office does an initial review. They determine if there's assets, if there's sufficient assets or income. They refuse representation. In this situation, that was done. It was then reviewed by the court, and the court said, hey, you have the means to hire your own attorney, and you have to do that or represent yourself.
Yeah, interesting how that played out. And as, of course, some officers have a fund that they pay into as they work, and that's how Eric Nelson was employed. Derek Chauvin obviously has a lot of things on his plate that are taxing his money, no pun intended, and that's why he had to go this route. Terry, what issues do you think are likely to come up on appeal?
There are so many issues, Brian, that are going to come up on appeal. They've already talked about there was an abuse of discretion by the court when there was a failure to change the venue, a failure to sequester the jury for the entire trial. We know those are two big issues. They also tried to claim that there was prosecutorial misconduct when we had the closing arguments. And you may recall that the prosecution said the defense was shading the truth and that was incorrect and wrong and prosecutorial misconduct. So there were a number of other areas. Maurice Hall also wasn't allowed. So I think that you're going to see a number of appeal grounds.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.